Welcome. Today we embark on a new story of betrayal, retribution, and twists of fate. What city or country are you joining us from? Now let's plunge into the tale. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against my apartment window like it wanted to break through and drown me. I stood there staring out at Boston's gray sprawl, streetlights flickering, cars slicing through puddles, people hunched under umbrellas scurrying home. March in this city was relentless, a cold, wet fist that wouldn't let up. Inside though, it was worse. The silence pressed in, thick and accusing, wrapping around me like a shroud. My name's Dominic Voss. I'm 42, a private detective with a past in special forces, a man who's seen blood and betrayal up close. But tonight, I wasn't hunting a mark or piecing together a case. I was staring at the wreckage of my own life, and it cut deeper than any bullet I'd ever dodged. On the table behind me sat a note, its edges curling like it was ashamed to be there. I didn't need to read it again, the words were branded into me. Dominic, I'm leaving. You're a loser and I deserve better. I'm with Richard now. Don't look for me. Emily. My wife, my Emily, had walked out. Not just out of our home but straight into the arms of Richard Grant, our smug, obscenely rich neighbor. He lived 2 floors up in this overpriced Back Bay building, lording his wealth over everyone with his tailored suits and that gleaming black Porsche he parked like a trophy. He'd always smirked at me, tossing casual jabs about my little detective gig, while flashing his Rolex. I grit my teeth and let it slide. But this was a knife in the gut, twisted with a grin. I turned from the window, picked up the note and crushed it in my fist. My knuckles whitened, trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since my combat days. Loser. The word rattled in my skull, lighting a fire I couldn't douse. I wasn't a loser, not to anyone who mattered. I'd tracked killers through war zones, dismantled crime rings, put my life on the line for justice when others ran. But Emily didn't see that. She saw a man who came home late, who poured his soul into cases instead of bank accounts, who couldn't give her the glittering life she craved. And Richard? He dangled that life in front of her like bait and she bit hard. The crumpled paper hit the floor as I sank into my chair, the leather creaking under me. Rain tapped the glass, a steady beat to my racing thoughts. I could still smell her perfume, jasmine, faint but clinging to the air. We'd been married 8 years. 8 years of quiet dinners, her laughter filling the room, her hand in mine on cold nights like this. Had it all been a lie? Or had I been too blind to see her drift? Either way, she'd made her choice and now I'd make mine. I grabbed my laptop from the desk, its screen casting a harsh glow across my face. My fingers hesitated over the keys, then typed a name I knew too well, Leo Blackwood. Leo was a hacker, a wiry ex-soldier I'd met in the field, a genius with a keyboard and a conscience as stubborn as mine. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly through the static. Dom? You good man? No, I said, my tone clipped. I need you, Leo. Dig into Richard Grant. Everything, finances, business, any dirt you can find. A pause, then a low chuckle. Finally checking that slimeball out? What's the occasion? It's personal now, I replied, my voice tight as a coiled spring. Emily left me for him. Damn, he muttered. All right, I'm on it. Give me a few days. He hung up, leaving me with the rain and my resolve. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, its cracks spider-webbing like my fractured life. Emily thought I'd slink away, tail between my legs, while Richard gloated. They were wrong. I'd spent years uncovering truths people buried deep. Now I'd turn that skill on them. If there was rot beneath Richard's polished surface, and I'd bet my last dollar there was, I'd drag it into the light. They'd regret underestimating me. The storm outside roared on, but inside, something colder and sharper was brewing. The days after Emily's note blurred into a gray slog, each one bleeding into the next like the rain-soaked streets outside my window. Boston didn't let up. March clung to its damp chill, the wind rattling shutters and whipping trash across the sidewalks. I went through the motions, took a cheating spouse case, tailed a mark through the North End, snapped photos of late-night trysts. Kept my hands busy, but my mind? That was a war zone, replaying her words, her departure, the way she turned her back on us. I'd catch myself staring at nothing, coffee going cold in my grip, her voice echoing, loser. It wasn't just hurt, it was fuel. Nights were the worst. I'd slump on the couch, the apartment too quiet without her humming or the clatter of her cooking. I found an old photo tucked in a drawer, us at the Cape 2 summers back, her hair wild from the wind, my arm around her, both of us grinning like the world couldn't touch us. Had she been planning her escape even then? I traced her smile with my thumb, then tossed the picture aside. Sentiment wouldn't help me now. Answers would. Leo called on the third night, just as I was pouring a whiskey I didn't need. The amber liquid swirled in the glass, catching the dim light of my desk lamp. Dominic, I've got something, he said, his voice crackling through the line. It's ugly. Hit me, I replied, setting the glass down untouched. My pulse kicked up, a familiar thrill from the old days, hunting closing in. Richard Grant's tangled in some shady financials, Leo started. Looks like money laundering through his real estate empire, shell companies, offshore accounts, the works. There's ties to some nasty criminal types too, but it's murky. I'm still digging. Can you prove it? I pressed, leaning forward. My chair creaked, the sound sharp in the stillness. Not airtight yet. Need more time to crack the encryption on his transactions, he said. But this guy's dirty, Dom. I'd stake my rig on it. Keep going, I told him. I want it ironclad. He grunted agreement and hung up. I sat back, the whiskey forgotten, adrenaline buzzing through me like a live wire. Money laundering. Criminal ties. If Leo was right, and he usually was, Richard wasn't just a smug bastard. He was a crook hiding behind his penthouse in Portia. Emily had traded me for a lie, a glittering facade built on quicksand. Part of me wanted to storm up there, shove it in her face, watch her squirm. But no, this needed precision, not passion. I'd dismantle him brick by brick and she'd see it all collapse. I paced the apartment, boots thudding on the hardwood. The rain had eased to a drizzle, tapping the windows like a restless code. My reflection stared back from the glass, hollow eyes, jaw tight, a man on the edge of something dark. I thought of Emily up there with him, probably sipping champagne, laughing at how she'd upgraded. Did she know what he was? Or had she blinded herself to it, too dazzled by the cash? Either way, I wouldn't let her drown in his mess without knowing the truth. She called me a loser, fine. I'd show her what a loser could do. I grabbed my coat, the leather worn but heavy with purpose, and stepped into the night. The air bit at my face, sharp and damp, streetlights smearing yellow across wet pavement. I needed more than Leo's digital scraps. Something concrete, something I could hold up and say, this is who you chose. My old Special Forces contacts could help, but it was a risk. Those guys played in shadows deeper than Richard's, and favors came with strings. Still, I'd walked that line before. I headed for my car, a beat-up 18 Ford that growled to life despite its scars. The city loomed around me, brick row houses, neon signs, the distant hum of the Charles River. Richard thought he was untouchable, but I'd spent years peeling back masks like his. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was justice, and I'd serve it cold. The drizzle streaked my windshield as I drove, a promise of the storm still to come. The neon sign of O'Malley's flickered red and green, casting jagged reflections across the puddles outside. It was a dive bar on the edge of South Boston, the kind of place where the air smelled of stale beer and regret, and the jukebox played Springsteen like a prayer for better days. I pushed through the door, the bell jingling faintly over the murmur of low voices and clinking glasses. March had draped the city in a damp shroud, and inside, the heat was a sluggish fight against the chill seeping through cracked windows. I spotted Marcus in a corner booth, broad shoulders hunched, a scarred hand nursing a pint. He was an old squad mate from my Special Forces days, a mountain of a man with eyes that had seen too much. Dominic, been a while? He rumbled, gripping my hand like he could crush it. Too long, I said, sliding in across from him. The vinyl seat groaned under me, sticky with years of spills. I need a favor, Marcus. Off the books. His gaze sharpened, cutting through the bar's haze. You in trouble? Not yet, I replied, voice low. Emily left me. Ran off with Richard Grant, our rich neighbor. I think he's dirty, money laundering, maybe worse. Leo's digging, but I need more. Marcus leaned back, the booth creaking. Grant? Heard whispers. Guy's name floats around some rough circles. Smugglers, loan sharks. You digging here, watch your back. I can handle it, I said, meeting his stare. What do you know? He took a slow sip, foam clinging to his lip. Not much, just rumors. He's tied to players who don't like sunlight. I'll poke around, call in some favors. But Dom, these guys don't mess around. You sure about this? I'm sure, I said, my jaw tight. He took my wife, called me a loser through her. I'm not letting it stand. Marcus nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes, and promised to get back to me. I left the bar, the cold slapping my face as I stepped into the night, the neon buzzing behind me like a warning. Back home, my phone buzzed as I shook rain from my coat. Leo's name lit the screen. Got more? He said, skipping preamble. Richard's running a Ponzi scheme, Fake investments siphoning millions from suckers into his accounts. Found some encrypted emails too. He's cocky but sloppy. Enough to bury him? I asked, pacing the hardwood, boots leaving wet prints. Close. Need a witness or hard proof to seal it, he said. I'll keep pushing. I thanked him and hung up, the apartment's silence roaring back. A Ponzi scheme. Richard wasn't just dirty, he was a predator preying on trust. Emily had hitched herself to a leech and I'd make sure she saw his fangs. I didn't sleep. Instead, I tracked down a lead Leo'd flagged, an ex-employee of Richard's, Sam Carter, holed up in a safe house near Dorchester. Dawn was breaking, a weak smear of light over the city's brick and concrete, when I knocked on his door. He opened it a crack, eyes darting, thin guy, mid-30s, jittery as a cornered rat. You Voss? He whispered. Yeah. You Sam? I asked. He nodded, letting me in. The place stank of cigarettes and fear, blinds drawn tight. Tell me about Richard. He lit a smoke, hands shaking. I was his accountant. Saw it all, fake books, payoffs to hush investors. He threatened me when I quit. Said he'd ruin me. His voice cracked. I'll testify if you protect me. Deal? I said, pulling out my recorder. He spilled details, dates, names, amounts, each word a nail in Richard's coffin. I left with a file of audio, the city waking around me, horns blaring, buses rumbling. The evidence was stacking up, heavy and real. I could almost taste it, the moment I'd shove it in Richard's face, watch his smirk dissolve. Emily's too. The rain started again, a steady patter on my windshield as I drove home, matching the rhythm of my pulse. Piece by piece, I was unearthing his empire of lies, and it felt like loading a gun. One I'd fire soon. Morning light sliced through my blinds, weak and watery, painting stripes across the hardwood. I'd barely slept, Sam's recording still looping in my head, his shaky voice laying out Richard's crimes like a map to buried treasure. I was at the kitchen counter, coffee steaming in a chipped mug when the mail slot clattered. Bills, junk, and then, a gold-embossed envelope heavy with intent. My name stared up at me in elegant script, Dominic Voss. No return address, but I knew. My gut twisted as I tore it open, the paper crisp under my fingers. It was an invitation. Emily and Richard's wedding, Saturday, March 15, 2025, at some swanky estate just outside Boston. The card dripped with extravagance. Cream stock, raised lettering, a RSVP slip I'd never send. I could picture her smirking as she penned my name, her delicate hand looping the letters, imagining me opening it. This wasn't a courtesy, it was a taunt, a final jab to parade me as the broken ex before their glittering guests. Richard probably laughed over it, clinking glasses with her in his penthouse, betting I'd crumble. Rage flared hot in my chest, my grip creasing the card. I tossed it on the counter, the gold ink catching the light like a dare. I stood there, breathing hard, the apartment's silence a mocking echo. Outside, Boston grumbled awake, car horns, the distant wail of a siren, rain tapping the window like it was impatient for blood. Emily wanted to bury me under their triumph, grind my face in it. For a second I saw it, me showing up, fists flying, smashing Richard's smug grin. But no, that was too small, too messy. This invite wasn't her victory, it was my opening. A stage to flip the script. I grabbed my phone and dialed Leo, pacing as it rang. They invited me to the wedding, I said when he picked up, skipping the hello. It's our shot. He let out a low whistle. Bold move, Dom. Crashing their big day with a hammer? I like it. Not crashing, I corrected, voice steadying. Exposing. We've got Sam, the recordings, your financials. Can you lock it down by Saturday? Tight but doable, he said. I'll pull the last threats, decrypt those emails, tie the money to the Ponzi. You'll need the cops on standby. FBI, I said. I've got a contact. We'll time it, hit during the ceremony. Maximum impact. Leo chuckled, dark and approving, and we mapped it out. I'd walk in with the evidence, he'd signal the feds when I gave the word. Risky as hell, public, chaotic, a dozen ways it could backfire. But I'd lived for calculated gambles in the field, and this one felt right. Richard's downfall, Emily's shock, all laid bare before their adoring crowd. Justice didn't get sweeter than that. I hung up and picked up the invite again, running my thumb over the embossed crest. The estate's address stared back, lush gardens, marble halls, a perfect mask for Richard's rot. I imagined Emily in white, radiant and oblivious, Richard preening beside her. They'd built their castle on lies and I'd bring it crashing down. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I crossed to my desk, pulled out a folder, Sam's audio, Leo's printouts, a growing arsenal. The rain picked up, drumming harder, a rhythm to my resolve. I leaned against the window, watching droplets race down the glass, streaking the city beyond. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days to sharpen the blade, line up the shot. Emily thought this would be her moment to shine, Richards to gloat. They were wrong. I'd spent years unmasking monsters, now I'd unmask theirs. The invite sat on the counter, its elegance a lie atop a house of cards. I smiled, cold and thin, the first real one in days. They'd handed me the key to their ruin, and I'd turn it without mercy. The next 3 days were a blur of motion, each hour a cog in the machine I was building to take Richard down. Boston stayed locked in its March gloom, slate skies, relentless drizzle, the Charles River churning muddy and restless. My apartment became a war room. Desk buried under papers, laptop glowing with Leo's updates, coffee mugs piling up like spent shells. I barely ate, barely slept, driven by a cold fire that burned hotter with every new piece of evidence. Sam's recording sat digitized on my drive, his voice a shaky thread weaving through bank records Leo pried loose. Millions funneled through fake companies, investors bled dry. It was a house of cards and I'd be the wind to topple it. Leo and I worked like men possessed. Got the emails, he said late Wednesday, voice hoarse over the line. Decrypted. Richard's dumb enough to brag, names, dates, payoffs to silence a whistleblower. It's gold, Dom. Enough for the feds? I asked, scribbling notes, my pen digging into the pad. More than enough. Pair it with Sam's testimony and he's toast, Leo replied. I called my FBI contact, Agent Torres, a gruff ex-Marine I'd crossed paths with on a trafficking bust years back. He listened, grunted approval and promised a team on standby. Give the signal, Voss, and we'll roll in, he said. I hung up, the plan locking into place. I'd hit the wedding with proof, Leo'd cue Torres and Richard's empire would crumble mid-vows. Clean, brutal, poetic. Days were mechanical but nights gutted me. I'd lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, shadows dancing from passing headlights. Emily's ghost lingered, her laugh, the way she'd curl into me when thunder rumbled, her fingers tracing scars she never asked about. I hated that I still cared, that part of me wanted to yank her from the wreckage before it fell. But she'd chosen this, chosen Richard's flash over our quiet, hard-earned life. That truth was a steel rod in my spine, keeping me upright when exhaustion clawed. I'd save her from ignorance, sure, but not from consequence. She'd feel every ounce of what she'd sown. Thursday night, I met Sam again, this time in a diner off I-93. The place smelled of grease and burnt coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He slid into the booth, hood up, eyes darting like a hunted animal. "You're sure about this?" I asked, sliding him a burner phone. "Testifying means exposure." He nodded, pale but firm. "I want him gone. He ruined me, threatened my kid. I'm in." I ran him through his statement again, every detail etched in my head. His resolve was a mirror to mine, cracked but holding. I left him there, rain streaking the diner's windows, the city beyond a blur of wet lights. Back home, I stood at my window watching droplets bead and fall, each one a countdown to Saturday. The invite sat on my desk, gold edges mocking me. I'd ironed my best suit, black, sharp, a weapon of its own, ready to walk into their fairy tale and turn it to ash. My reflection stared back, hollowed by days of grind, but my eyes burned with something fierce. This wasn't just about Richard anymore, or even Emily. It was about me reclaiming what they tried to strip away, my name, my worth. I'd spent years chasing justice for strangers, now I'd claim it for myself. The clock ticked past midnight, Friday bleeding into the final hours. I checked my gear, folder of evidence, recorder, phone synced with Leo. Torres's number was one tap away. The rain eased, leaving a dripping hush over Boston, the calm before my storm. I didn't know if Emily'd beg, scream, or collapse when it hit, didn't care. She'd invited me to watch her rise, instead she'd see me tear it all down. Saturday loomed, a horizon sharp with promise. I was ready, every nerve alight, every move rehearsed. The city slept but I didn't. I stood vigil, waiting to strike. Friday night settled over Boston like a held breath, the rain finally spent, leaving the city slick and still. I sat alone in my apartment, the only light a faint glow from the street lamps bleeding through the blinds. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11 p.m., each second a drumbeat counting down to tomorrow, March 15, 2025, the day I'd turn Emily and Richard's wedding into their reckoning. My suit hung on the doorframe, black and crisp, a shadow waiting to step into the fight. On the table, my arsenal lay ready, The folder thick with bank records, Sam's audio file backed up on a drive, my phone charged and synced with Leo. Everything was set, a loaded gun with the safety off. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under me, and let the silence sink in. The apartment felt hollow without her. No clatter of dishes, no soft hum of her voice. I could still see Emily here, padding barefoot across the hardwood, her hair catching the light as she laughed at some dumb joke I'd cracked. 8 years and now this. I rubbed my face, fingers rasping over stubble, trying to shake the memory. She'd called me a loser, walked out for Richard's gold-plated lies. That hurt lingered, a bruise I couldn't ignore, but it wasn't despair anymore, it was a spur driving me to this edge. I stood and crossed to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. The city stretched out below, a patchwork of wet rooftops and sodium-lit streets, quiet for once. A lone car rolled by, tires hissing on damp asphalt, its taillights fading into the dark. Tomorrow would end this chapter. Win or lose, I'd close the book on them. I'd spent the day triple-checking. Leo had the feds queued, Torres confirmed his team's positions, Sam was prepped to follow if needed. The plan was tight, a sniper's shot aimed at Richard's heart. But plans could fray, variables could shift, and I'd learned in the field to brace for chaos. I called Leo one last time, needing the anchor. FBI set, he said, voice steady through the static. Signals a go, text now when you're ready. Torres'll move fast. Good, I replied, my throat tight. No slip-ups, Leo. This is it. You've got this, Dom, he said. They won't know what hit him. I hung up, the phone heavy in my hand, and set it beside the invite. That gold-embossed card sat there, a taunt-turned weapon. Emily'd meant it to mock me, to flaunt her better life. Instead, it was her mistake, handing me the stage to unmask Richard before their adoring crowd. I pictured her in her gown, radiant and blind, him smirking in his tux, king of his fraud-built castle. They'd built it on sand and I'd bring the tide. Sleep wouldn't come, so I didn't chase it. I paced instead, boots soft on the floor, replaying every move in my head. The evidence was ironclad: Leo's financials, Sam's testimony, emails tying Richard to the Ponzi scheme, and worse. Torres had arrest warrants ready. It'd be public, messy, final. I stopped at the desk, picked up the recorder, and thumbed it on. Sam's voice crackled out, thin but damning. He threatened me, millions gone. I clicked it off, the words a cold comfort. Justice wasn't just about them, it was about me, proving I wasn't the man she'd discarded. The clock hit 2 a.m., the city a hushed expanse beyond the glass. I sat again, staring at my hands, calloused, steady hands that had held guns and her alike. Tomorrow they'd hold their ruin. Emily might cry, Richard might rage, but I'd walk away whole. The quiet pressed in, thick with promise, and I let it settle over me like armor. Saturday loomed, a dawn I'd meet head-on. I wasn't a loser, not tonight, not ever again. I'd prove it, and they'd feel every jagged shard of that truth. Saturday broke over Boston with a grudging sun, its light thin and pale, barely piercing the March haze. I stood at my window one last time, watching the city stir, delivery trucks rumbling, joggers braving the damp chill along the Charles. My suit clung to me, black and tailored, a second skin for the fight ahead. The folder of evidence sat in my briefcase, a ticking bomb I'd carry into their perfect day. I checked my phone, Leo's ready text glowed back, Torres's number locked in. March 15, 2025 wasn't their wedding day anymore. It was mine, and I'd make it unforgettable. The drive to the estate took 40 minutes, winding out of the city into rolling hills where wealth hid behind iron gates and manicured lawns. The place was a sprawl of old money, red brick and ivy, gardens dripping with roses despite the season, a fountain gurgling like it mocked the drought of my life. Cars lined the drive, BMW, Mercedes, a Rolls-Royce glinting in the sun, each one a testament to Richard's circle. I parked my battered Ford at the edge, its dents a quiet rebellion, and stepped out, briefcase in hand. The air smelled of wet earth and privilege, a breeze tugging at my tie as I walked toward the marquee. Guests milled around, women in pastel dresses, men in suits that cost more than my rent. I caught their glances, some pitying, some sneering, whispers trailing me like smoke. That's her ex, poor bastard. I ignored them, my pulse a steady drumbeat, eyes scanning the setup. White chairs in rows, a floral arch framing the altar, staff bustling with trays of champagne. It was flawless, a fairy tale built on fraud, and I was the shadow creeping in to burn it down. Emily emerged as I reached the lawn, a vision in white that stopped my breath. Her gown flowed like liquid silk, veil catching the light, her auburn hair swept up in curls. She was beautiful, achingly so, and for a heartbeat I was back in our past, her hand in mine, promising forever. Then she turned, saw me, and her smile faltered. Something flickered in her green eyes, guilt, maybe, or defiance, before she looked away, linking arms with a bridesmaid. I clenched my jaw, the sting of her rejection a fresh cut, but it sharpened my focus. She'd chosen this, now she'd face it. Richard appeared next, strutting from the manor in a tuxedo sharp enough to draw blood. He was all polish, blonde hair slicked back, grin wide and smug, shaking hands like a politician. He didn't see me at first, too busy basking in his triumph, but when our gazes locked, his smirk twitched. "Dominic," he called, voice dripping with mock surprise. "Didn't think you'd show. Enjoy the open bar, it's the least I can do." Laughter rippled around him, his cronies eating it up. I said nothing, just stared, letting him feel the weight of my silence. His grin faded a fraction, unease creeping in, and I turned away, taking my seat near the back. The crowd settled, the priest stepping up, a gray-haired man with a voice like warm gravel. Music swelled, a string quartet coaxing out Pachelbel's canon, and Emily glided down the aisle, every eye on her. I gripped my briefcase tighter, the leather creaking under my fingers, my heart pounding a rhythm of its own. She reached Richard, their hands clasping, his thumb brushing her knuckles like a claim. The priest began, words about love and union washing over me, meaningless against the storm I carried. Guests smiled, dabbed tears, oblivious to the fault lines cracking beneath them. I shifted, glancing at my phone, no signal yet, just waiting. The estate's grandeur loomed, marble steps, chandeliers glinting through windows, a lie of stability. Emily's veil fluttered as she glanced at Richard, her lips curving softly. Did she know? Did she care? My chest tightened, but I shoved it down. This wasn't about saving her anymore, it was about ending him. The priest's voice rose, nearing the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. My thumb hovered over Leo's number, the air thick with anticipation. It was almost time. The priest's voice rolled over the crowd, steady and solemn, the words a countdown to my strike. If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined, speak now or forever hold your peace. A hush fell, the string quartet fading to a whisper, the estate's roses trembling in the faint breeze. I stood, briefcase in hand, the creak of my chair slicing through the silence. Heads turned, eyes widening, some curious, some horrified. Emily froze, her veil a fragile shield, Richard's grin twitching into a scowl. This was it. "I object," I said, my voice cutting the air like a blade. Gasps rippled through the guests, a wave of murmurs swelling behind me. I stepped into the aisle, boots thudding on the grass, every gaze a weight I shrugged off. Emily's face paled, her lips parting as she hissed, "Dominic, what are you doing?" "Showing the truth," I replied, calm but cold, lifting the folder from my case. "Richard Grant's a fraud. Money laundering, a Ponzi scheme, millions stolen from people who trusted him. I've got proof." I flipped it open, holding up a bank record, numbers stark against the white page. Shell companies, fake investments, he's been bleeding investors dry for years. And here, I pulled out the recorder, thumbing it on. Sam's voice crackled out, thin but damning. He threatened me, hid the losses. I let it play, each word a hammer strike, then clicked it off, staring at Richard. He blustered, face reddening, stepping forward. "This is absurd. Lies, all of it. You're a jealous lunatic, Voss." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through the bravado. Guests shifted, some clutching pearls, others leaning in, the air electric with shock. Emily grabbed his arm, whispering, "Richard, what's he talking about?" He shook her off, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. I didn't flinch. "Sam Carter's here to back it up," I said, nodding toward the back where he'd slipped in, hood up, pale but nodding. "He cooked your books, saw the payoffs. And these?" I tossed printouts of Leo's decrypted emails onto the grass, pages fluttering like fallen leaves. "You bragged about it, Richard. To your buddies, your dirty partners. It's over." The crowd erupted, shouts, gasps, a woman fainting into her husband's arms. Richard lunged at me, fists clenched, but I sidestepped, years of training kicking in. "You bastard," he roared, spittle flying. "I'll ruin you." I caught his wrist, twisted it back, and held him there, his breath hot against my face. "You're done," I said, low and final, shoving him off. He stumbled, tuxedo rumpled, the king unraveling before his court. Emily staggered, her veil slipping, green eyes wide with panic. "Dominic, stop this. You're humiliating me." Her voice broke, a plea wrapped in fury. I met her gaze, the woman I'd loved staring back like a stranger. "You humiliated yourself," I said, voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You picked him. This is what he is. A murmur rose from the guests, phones out, filming, whispering. Richard spun, pointing at Sam. You're dead for this. Sam flinched but stood his ground, bolstered by my nod. The priest stammered, clutching his Bible, the ceremony a wreckage around him. I pulled my phone, thumbed now, to Leo and slipped it back in my pocket. The signal was set. Any second, Torres would storm in, cuffs ready. I stood tall, the folder still in hand, evidence a shield and sword. Richard's cronies edged closer, suits wrinkled with sweat, but the crowd's chaos held them back. Chairs tipping, voices clashing, a tide of disbelief. Emily sank to her knees, gown pooling around her, a sob escaping as she stared at Richard, then me. How could you? She whispered, but I didn't know who she meant. I didn't answer. The estate's elegance, marble, roses, chandeliers, mocked the mess unfolding, a gilded cage cracking open. My pulse thrummed, steady and sure. The truth was out, raw and bleeding, and the feds were coming. This was just the beginning of their fall. The air crackled with chaos, the wedding guests a swarm of stunned faces and frantic voices, their elegant facade shattered. Richard stood wild-eyed, tuxedo askew, shouting over the din, "This is a setup. He's lying." His finger jabbed at me, trembling with rage, but the crowd's murmurs drowned him out, doubt spreading like wildfire. I stayed rooted, briefcase at my feet, the evidence strewn across the grass like confetti from a ruined celebration. Emily knelt nearby, her gown a crumpled heap, tears streaking her face as she stared at him, then me, a broken pendulum swinging between betrayal and disbelief. A roar of engines cut through the noise, black SUVs tearing up the drive, tires crunching gravel, red and blue lights flashing against the estate's ivy-clad walls. Doors slammed and FBI agents spilled out, badges glinting, voices sharp. "Richard Grant, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering and racketeering." Torres barked, striding forward, a bull of a man with cuffs dangling from his hand. The crowd parted, some gasping, others scrambling for exits, heels sinking into the lawn. Richard bolted, shoving past a bridesmaid who shrieked as she fell. "No. You can't do this," he yelled, desperation pitching his voice high. He made it 3 steps before 2 agents tackled him, pinning him face down in the dirt, his polished shoes kicking uselessly. The cuffs clicked shut, a sound crisp and final, and they hauled him up, his face smeared with mud, eyes blazing with hate. "Voss, you're dead for this," he spat, twisting in their grip as they dragged him toward the vehicles. I watched, arms crossed, a cold satisfaction settling in my bones. The guests buzzed, phones filming, voices rising in panic, while the priest clutched his Bible like a lifeline, muttering prayers no one heard. Sam hovered at the edge, pale but steady, nodding at me as Torres's team secured the scene. Evidence bags swallowed my printouts, the recorder, every scrap I'd brought to bury him. It was done, Richard's empire, his smug reign, reduced to this. A handcuffed wreck snarling threats that meant nothing now. Emily's sob pulled my attention. She'd staggered to her feet, veil gone, hair tumbling loose, her beauty undone by the wreckage around her. "No, it's not true," she whispered, hands clutching her gown, eyes locked on Richard as the agents shoved him into an SUV. Then she turned to me, stepping closer, her voice raw. "Dominic, why? Why destroy everything?" I met her gaze, the green of her eyes dulled by tears, and felt the old ache flare, love twisted into something sharp and unrecognizable. "You destroyed us," I said low and steady. "You called me a loser, ran to him. I just showed you who he really is." My words landed like stones and she flinched, wrapping her arms around herself as if they'd pierced her. "Take me back," she pleaded, reaching for my sleeve, fingers brushing the fabric. "I was wrong, I see it now. Please, Dominic." Her voice cracked, a desperate edge cutting through the chaos, the feds' radios crackling behind us. For a second I saw the Emily I'd married, vulnerable mine, but it vanished under the weight of her choice, her betrayal. "No," I said, stepping back, her hand falling empty. "You wanted this life. Live with it." I turned, the grass soft under my boots, and walked past the toppled chairs, the scattered roses, the guests still reeling. Her sob followed me, sharp and fading, but I didn't look back. Richard's SUV peeled out, gravel spitting, and the crowd thinned as reality sank in. Their king was fallen, their fairy tale of fraud. I reached my car, the Ford's familiar dents a quiet anchor. The estate loomed behind me, its marble and wealth a hollow shell now, sirens wailing into the distance. My phone buzzed. "Leo, nailed it, Dom, drinks later?" I smirked, pocketing it. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the ruin I'd left. Emily's plea echoed, but it couldn't touch me. I'd won, not just against Richard but against the part of me she'd broken. I drove off the road stretching ahead, free. Sunday morning crept in slow and gray, the sun a faint smear behind Boston's clouds. I woke on the couch, suit jacket crumpled beside me, the apartment still humming with the echo of yesterday's chaos. The wedding played in my head, Richard's cuffs clicking, Emily's sobs, the guests' stunned faces, like a film I couldn't pause. I'd won, torn their world apart with cold precision, but the victory sat heavy, a stone in my chest. I shuffled to the kitchen, brewed coffee, the hiss of the machine a small comfort against the silence she'd left behind. The news hit by noon. My phone buzzed with alerts, headlines screaming Boston tycoon arrested at lavish wedding, fraud scheme exposed. Photos splashed across screens, Richard in cuffs, mud-streaked and raging, the estate's roses trampled in the background. My name popped up too, ex-husband's evidence seals Grant's fate, and I skimmed it, a grim satisfaction curling my lips. Leo texted, "Your famous Dom, beers tonight?" I typed back, "Yeah," and tossed the phone aside. The city buzzed with it, but here in my four walls, it was just me and the fallout. I was at my desk, sifting through the wreckage of my own evidence, crumpled printouts, Sam's audio file, when the buzzer rang sharp and insistent. I froze, then crossed to the intercom, dread coiling tight. "Who is it?" I asked, voice rough. "Dominic, it's me," Emily said, small and broken through the static. My hand hovered, then hit the button. She'd come, I'd known she would, clinging to the last thread of us. I opened the door and there she was. No gown, no veil, just jeans and a coat, eyes red-rimmed, hair limp from the drizzle outside. She looked smaller, stripped of the wedding's glow, a ghost of the woman I'd loved. "Let me in," she said, stepping forward. I didn't move, blocking the threshold, arms crossed. "Please, I need to talk." "Say it here," I replied, cold enough to feel the air shift. She flinched, hugging herself against the hall's draft, then nodded. "I'm sorry," she started, voice trembling. "I was wrong, about you, about him. He lied to me, promised me everything, and I fell for it. I was stupid, Dominic. Forgive me. Take me back." Tears spilled, carving tracks down her cheeks, her hands wringing like she could squeeze the past away. I watched her, the ache flaring again, old love warring with new steel. She was wrecked, pleading, the Emily who'd once lit my world. But that light had dimmed when she'd called me a loser, walked out for Richard's shine. I leaned against the frame, the wood biting into my shoulder, and let the silence stretch. "You betrayed me," I said finally, each word deliberate. "For his money, his lies. You don't get to undo that because it fell apart." "I know I hurt you," she pressed, stepping closer, her scent, jasmine, hitting me like a memory. "But we can fix it. I still love you, Dominic. Please." "No," I cut in, sharp and final, pushing off the frame. "You loved what he offered, not me. I gave you everything I had, years, loyalty, and you threw it away. You don't get a redo because he's gone." Her sob broke, loud in the empty hall, but I held firm, the stone in my chest unyielding. She sank against the wall, sliding down, hands covering her face. "What do I do now?" she whispered, more to herself than me. I didn't answer, just shut the door, the click of full stop on us. Her muffled cries faded as I walked back to the desk, the apartment sealing around me like a fortress. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping the windows, washing the city clean. I sat, staring at the folder, evidence of my win, proof I wasn't the loser she'd named. It felt good, sharp-edged and real, but hollow too, a space where she'd been. I grabbed my coat, headed for Leo's bar. The past was done, locked behind that door with her tears. Tomorrow I'd figure out what came next. For now, I'd drink to the ruin I'd made and the man I'd become. Monday morning broke with a rare break in the clouds, sunlight spilling over Boston's rooftops, glinting off wet streets. I stood at my window, coffee in hand, watching the city shake off its March dreariness, delivery vans weaving, pigeons scattering from puddles. The apartment felt lighter, less attuned since Emily's visit, her plea still echoing but fainter now. I'd won. Richard was behind bars, his fraud splashed across every newsstand, and she'd seen the truth. That victory was mine, hard-earned and heavy, but it left a question. What next? I met Leo that night at a dive near Fenway, its neon sign buzzing, the air thick with beer and chatter. He slid into the booth, grinning, a bottle in each hand. "To the man who took down a king," he said, clinking his against mine. The beer was cold, sharp, a jolt to my system after days of coffee and adrenaline. We drank, the noise of the bar a buffer to the silence I'd lived in. You're a legend now, Dom, Leo said, leaning back, his wiry frame relaxed. Feds called me, Grant singing, trying to cut a deal. Your evidence cracked him wide open. Good, I replied, tracing the bottle's label with my thumb. He's where he belongs. Satisfaction curled in me, but it wasn't enough. The fight had hollowed me out, left gaps I couldn't ignore. Leo watched, eyes narrowing like he could read it. What's the plan? He asked, voice low under the bar's hum. You can't just sit in that place brooding. I took a sip, the question sinking in. He was right. Staying meant stagnation, letting her shadow linger in every corner. I'm selling the apartment, I said, the decision firming as I spoke. Too many ghosts. Time to move. Leo nodded, then leaned forward, elbows on the table. Got an idea. You and me partners. A detective agency. Your field chops, my tech? We'd clean up this city, take cases the cops won't touch. His grin widened, infectious, a spark I hadn't felt in weeks. I paused, bottle halfway to my lips. Partnership. A new fight, a new purpose, something to build, not just destroy. You serious? I asked, though I knew he was. Leo didn't bluff. Dead serious, he said. Think about it, Voss and Blackwood kicking ass and cashing checks. Beats sulking alone. A laugh escaped me, rough but real, the first in too long. All right, I said, clinking my bottle to his again. Let's do it. The deal sealed in that grimy booth, a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. We hashed it out, office space, first cases, a name still TBD, until the bar dimmed, the crowd thinning. Back home, I listed the apartment online, photos snapped in the morning's thin light. It sold fast, cash offer, no haggling, a clean break. I packed light. Clothes, my gear, a few books, leaving the rest for the new owner. The place emptied out, its walls bare, the echo of Emily's voice finally mute. I stood in the middle, briefcase in hand, the same one I'd carried to the wedding, feeling the weight lift piece by piece. Tuesday I drove west, the city shrinking in my rear view. Leo'd scouted a spot in Providence, smaller, grittier, a fresh slate an hour from Boston's ghosts. The road stretched open, sun dipping low, painting the sky gold and pink. I cracked the window, let the air rush in, cool, clean, untainted. My phone buzzed. Leo again, office is ours. Move your ass. I smirked, foot easing on the gas. The Ford rumbled on, its dents a badge of battles won. I wasn't running, just relocating, rearming for what came next. Richard's ruin, Emily's tears, they'd shaped me but they didn't own me. With Leo I'd chase justice again, build something solid. The horizon glowed, a promise I could touch. For the first time in months I felt steady, not whole yet but getting there. Providence waited and so did I. The last day in Boston dawned crisp and quiet, a rare stillness settling over the city as March edged toward its end. I stood in the empty apartment, keys dangling in my hand, the hardwood gleaming under a shaft of sunlight that slipped through the blinds. The walls echoed with nothing, no furniture, no footsteps, just the hum of a life I'd packed away. I'd sold it all or left it, couch, bed, the dishes she'd picked, stripping the place to its bones. My duffel sat by the door, briefcase beside it, all I'd take to Providence. One final walk, then I'd go. I stepped into the living room, boots scuffing the floor, and let the memories flood in. Emily laughing here, wineglass in hand, the night we danced to some old vinyl, her head on my chest. The fights too, her voice sharp, mine low, the air thick with things we couldn't fix. I saw her writing that note, pen trembling, the word loser, a blade she didn't know would cut both ways. The room held it all, a gallery of us, and I stood in its center, letting it wash over me one last time. Not to cling but to release. Outside, the back bay stirred, cars humming down Commonwealth, a dog barking, the faint clatter of a trash bin. I crossed to the window, peering at the street where I'd watched her leave, her silhouette fading into Richard's world. That pain had fueled me, driven me to tear him down, but now? It was a scar, not a wound, fading, manageable. I pressed my hand to the glass, cool against my palm, and felt the weight shift. She'd been my anchor once, then my storm. Today she was just a memory I could walk away from. I grabbed my gear and locked the door, the click a quiet farewell. Downstairs I dropped the keys with the super, a gruff nod his only goodbye. The Ford waited curbside, its engine growling to life as I slid in. I drove slow, taking the long route, past the public garden, its bare trees stark against the sky, then along the Charles, its water glinting under a weak sun. Boston unfolded around me, brick and steel, a city that had shaped me through grit and loss. I'd fought here, bled here, won here. Now it was time to let it go. The radio crackled, some talk show buzzing about Richard's case, Indictments piling up, assets seized. I switched it off, preferring the hum of tires on asphalt. He was a ghost now, locked away, his empire dust. Emily too, she'd called once since Sunday, a voicemail I'd deleted unheard. Her voice didn't belong in this new space I was carving. I turned onto Starro Drive, the skyline shrinking in my mirror, and felt the tether snap, clean, final. Providence was an hour out, but I stopped halfway, pulling into a diner off the highway. The place smelled of bacon and burnt coffee, its booths worn but warm. I sat by the window, sipping black coffee, watching trucks roll by, their headlights cutting the dusk. My phone stayed silent. No Leo yet, just me and my thoughts. I'd torn down a king, faced her tears, walked away whole. That was enough for now. The rest, Voss and Blackwood cases, a new life, would come. I wasn't running from Boston, I was carrying its lessons forward. The sun dipped low, streaking the sky orange and purple, a bruise healing over. I paid the bill, left a tip, and stepped into the evening chill. The Ford's door creaked as I climbed in, the road stretching ahead, dark but open. Emily's note, Richard's smirk, they'd forged me into this. A man who'd lost, fought, and found his footing again. Boston faded behind me, its lights a distant glow. I didn't look back. The horizon called, soft and steady, and for the first time in months I answered it with something like peace. Providence greeted me with a damp hug, its streets narrower and rougher than Boston's, the air sharp with salt from the river. I rolled into town as dusk settled, the Ford's headlights cutting through a thin fog that clung to the brick warehouses and sagging row houses. March 2025 hadn't softened here, it was all edges, a city worn but alive, humming with a pulse I could feel in my bones. I found the address Leo'd sent, a squat two-story building off Atwells Avenue, its windows dark but for a flicker on the second floor. Our new office. I parked, grabbed my duffel and stepped out, the pavement slick under my boots. Leo met me at the door, his wiry frame silhouetted against the hall's dim light, a grin splitting his face. "Took you long enough, Dom," he said, clapping my shoulder hard enough to jostle me. "Welcome to the shit show." He led me up creaking stairs, the air smelling of dust and old paint, into a space that was more potential than polish, bare walls, a couple desks, wires dangling where he'd been rigging tech. A window overlooked the street, the city's glow smudging the glass. It wasn't much, but it was ours. "Home sweet home," I said, dropping my bag, the thud echoing in the emptiness. Leo handed me a beer from a cooler, the cap hissing as I twisted it off. We clinked bottles, the cold bite of it grounding me after the drive. "You've been busy." "Had to," he replied, leaning against a desk, his laptop open, screens glowing with code. "Feds called again, grants spilling names, trying to shave years off. Your wedding stunts got half the underworld scrambling." He smirked, proud, and I felt it too, a ripple of the wind we'd pulled off still reverberating. I sipped, pacing the room, boots scuffing the scarred wood. "What's the play here?" I asked, nodding at the setup. "Cases lined up?" "Few leads," he said, ticking them off on his fingers. "Missing person downtown, corporate theft out in Cranston. Nothing big yet, but word spreading, Voss and Blackwood mean business." His eyes glinted, that hacker's gleam I'd trusted in the field. "You in?" "Born in," I said, a half smile tugging my lips. We spent the next hour mapping it, divvying tasks, setting rules, sketching a sign for the door. It felt good, this rhythm. Him on the digital hunt, me in the streets, a team forged from years of grit. Boston had been solo, me against the world. Here I wasn't alone. Later we hit a bar down the block, a hole in the wall with sticky floors and a jukebox crooning Springsteen. The crowd was rough, dockworkers, locals, faces carved by hard lives, but they nodded as we passed, a quiet respect I hadn't earned yet. We grabbed a corner table, beers sweating on the wood, and Leo leaned in. "You good, Dom? After all that?" I rolled the bottle between my palms, the chill seeping into my skin. Emily's face flashed, her tears, her plea, but it was distant now, a storm past. "Yeah," I said, meeting his gaze. "Took her leaving, him falling, to figure out who I am. This," I tapped the table, the office in my mind, "this is me now." He nodded, slow and sure. "Knew you'd land on your feet. Always do." We drank, the bar's hum wrapping around us, a new city's heartbeat. Providence wasn't Boston. Smaller, rawer, a place to carve something fresh. Leo was more than an ally here. He was a brother, a tether when I'd been adrift. I'd lost a wife, a home, but gained this purpose, partnership, a fight worth having. The night deepened, fog thickening outside, muffling the streetlights. We walked back, breath fogging in the cold, the office looming ahead. New adventure, huh? Leo said, unlocking the door, his voice light but weighted. Damn right, I replied, stepping inside, the stairs creaking under us. The past was ash, Boston a shadow I'd outrun. With Leo I'd chase justice again, our way no compromises. The city stretched beyond the window, dark and waiting, a canvas for what we'd build. I set my beer on the desk, the clink a starting gun. We were here and I was ready. Providence woke me with a low rumble, freight trains clanking along the river, their horns cutting through the fog that draped the city. I'd crashed on a cot in the office, the new apartment still a pile of boxes I hadn't tackled. Morning light filtered through the grimy window, painting the bare walls in soft grays, the desk cluttered with Leo's gear and my half-empty coffee cup. March 2025 clung here, raw and unpolished, but it fit. Providence didn't pretend and neither would I. I stretched, joints popping, and felt the ache of the past few weeks settle into something manageable, a dull hum instead of a roar. I grabbed my duffel and headed downstairs, the stairs groaning under my boots. The street outside buzzed, cars splashing through puddles, a vendor hawking coffee from a cart, his breath fogging in the chill. I bought a cup, black and bitter, and walked toward the apartment I'd rented. A third-floor walk up a block away, brick faded but sturdy. The key turned stiffly in the lock, the door creaking open to a space that smelled of dust and possibility. Hardwood floors, a kitchenette, a window overlooking the river's muddy flow. My boxes sat in the corner, taped and silent, relics of a life I was ready to unpack. I started slow, slicing tape with my pocket knife, the sound sharp in the quiet. Clothes went into a dresser, books on a shelf, old mysteries, a few war memoirs, pages worn from late nights. Then I hit the bottom of one box, a photo, unframed, edges curling. Emily and me, Cape Cod, her smile bright against the dunes, my arm around her. I sank onto the floor, the frame cold in my hands, and stared. That day had been real, wind in our hair, salt on our skin, a moment before the cracks showed. I'd loved her deep and fierce, and she'd loved me too once. But it was gone, burned out by her choice, my fight. I didn't toss it, not yet. I slid it into a drawer, face down, a piece of history I could face later. The past shaped me, her leaving, Richard's fall, but it didn't own me. I stood, brushing dust off my jeans, and kept going. A lamp plugged in, my briefcase on the table, its leather scuffed from the wetting. Each move was a stitch, sewing this new life together. The river glinted outside, a sluggish mirror to my thoughts, and I let them drift, Emily's tears, her plea fading to static. She wasn't my burden anymore. Leo banged on the door mid-afternoon, his knock a gunshot in the stillness. You alive, Dom? He called, stepping in with a pizza box, grease spotting the cardboard. Figured you'd starve otherwise. Close, I said, grabbing a slice, the heat seeping into my fingers. We ate standing, leaning against the counter, the city's hum filtering through the walls. Office ready? Close enough, he replied, chewing. Got a client tomorrow. Missing kid, messy family. You in? His eyes flicked to mine, steady, a partner's trust. Yeah, I said, wiping my hands. Let's hit the ground running. He grinned and we finished the pizza, tossing the box in a corner. He left after, promising files by morning, and I was alone again, the apartment settling around me like a skin I'd grow into. Night fell, the fog thickening, muffling Providence's edges. I stood at the window, coffee gone cold, watching lights blink across the river, boats maybe or cars on the far shore. Boston was an hour away, a lifetime ago. I'd torn it down, Richard's lies, Emily's illusions, and walked away stronger. This place, this start, was mine. No ghosts, just me and the work ahead. The drawer stayed shut, the photo untouched. I didn't need it now. I turned off the light, the room sinking into shadow, and lay on the bare mattress, the cot's creak a familiar lullaby. Sleep came easier, the city's pulse a quiet promise outside. The past was a lesson, not a chain. Tomorrow with Leo I'd build something, case by case, step by step. I closed my eyes, the river's murmur fading, and let it go. Morning broke over Providence with a tentative glow, the sun nudging through the fog, casting gold streaks across the river. I woke early, the mattress bare but mine, the apartment's silence a blank slate instead of a weight. Late March 2025 had softened here, the air less biting, the city stirring with a gritty vitality I could lean into. I stood at the window, coffee steaming in my grip, watching a barge churn slowly downstream, its wake rippling the water's surface. The view was different, narrower than Boston's sprawl, rougher, but it fit. This was my ground now, a place to stand tall. I dressed in jeans and a jacket, the suit swapped for something practical, my boots scuffing the hardwood as I grabbed my briefcase. The office was a 5-minute walk, the streets waking around me, vendors shouting, cars rumbling, a kid on a bike weaving through. Providence had a pulse, raw and unpolished, and I matched it, stride steady, the past a shadow I'd outpaced. Leo was already there when I arrived, hunched over his laptop, the room smelling of solder and coffee. "Morning, partner," he said, tossing me a file. "Missing kid case, parents are a mess, cops are stumped. We're on." "Good," I replied, flipping it open. Photos, notes, a map of downtown. The work pulled me in, sharp and familiar, a tether to the man I'd always been, hunter, solver, relentless. We dove into it, plotting leads, Leo on the digital trail, me planning the streets. The rhythm clicked, a partnership forged in fire, and I felt the old spark flare, purpose clean and bright. Midday I stepped out for air, the sun higher now, warming the brick facades along Atwells. I leaned against the building, file tucked under my arm, watching the city move, workers unloading crates, a bus groaning past. Emily flickered in my mind, her laugh, her tears, but she was faint, a whisper I didn't chase. She'd shaped me, her betrayal a forge that hardened me, but she was gone. Richard too, caged, his empire ash. I'd torn them down, walked through the wreckage and come out whole. That was enough. Back inside, Leo grinned over a breakthrough, phone records tying the kid to a shady uncle. "We're close," he said, fingers flying across keys. I nodded, adding it to the map, the puzzle locking into place. This was us now, Voss and Blackwood, a name that'd mean something here. The office was still bare, desks, wires, a coffee pot, but it hummed with potential, a space we'd fill with wins case by case. Evening crept in, the fog rolling back, streetlights flickering on. I left Leo to his screens and walked home, the river glinting under a bruised sky, purple, orange, a quiet fire. Upstairs I unpacked the last box. A battered journal, a gift from my squad days, its pages blank. I sat at the table, pen in hand, and wrote, March 25, 2025, the day I started over. Not the wedding, not her note, but this. A new city, a new fight. The words flowed, brief, jagged, then stopped. I closed it, the leather cool under my palm, a line drawn. I stepped onto the balcony, the air cool, the city sprawling below. Lights blinking, horns fading, a living thing I'd join. Boston was a lesson learned. Its scars mine to carry, but they didn't bind me. Emily faded to a name, Richard to a footnote. With Leo I chased justice again, our rules, our terms. The river moved on, steady and sure, and I matched it, breath fogging in the dusk. A new dawn not just out there but in me. And that's the end of our story. What did you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, it means a lot to us. Check out recommended videos for similar tales. Until next time.